Ah, all right. Let's get ready here. Oh, yo. All right. Hi, everybody. Hopefully, Zoom's not making me test my audio, but Robin said hi in the chat, so I guess that means people can hear me, so that's good. And also, my cat is in the way. Excellent. So I'll just wait 2 or 3 more minutes. Luckily, this chapter that we're on right now is not as difficult as the previous one. So we should be able to cover almost everything today in that chapter. I'm going to cover everything except, I think, the last section. So, oh, hello. There we go. I can't see. What you doing, sir? Oh, this is Yo-Yo. And his brother's around here somewhere. I don't know where. He's shy. Anybody? Yo-Yo, you're so huge. You're taking up my entire desk. Come here, bud. Come here, buddy. Come on. One more minute. We'll just wait 1 more minute. Try and share my screen. In the meantime, with this cat in the way. Yo-Yo, what are you doing? I'm just trying to teach. Ow. What are you doing? All right. Okay, let's see. It's about time. Yeah, 7:35. So we'll just go ahead and get started. Okay, so just by way of a little bit of recap, we've already kind of got a good grasp of correctness conditions for emotions on the attitudinal theory. If you'll remember this little quote from page 91, the authors write that we have said that distinct emotional attitudes are correct when the object provided by their cognitive basis exemplifies the relevant evaluative property, right? So again, my fear is correct if, the snarling dog or the venomous spider or whatever really does bear the relevant evaluative property, namely danger. And the reason why they say the object is provided by the cognitive bases, well, that, perception of the venomous spider or the belief that there's a snarling dog behaving erratically, right? Those are mental states that form the cognitive bases of emotions. And speaking of mental states, I still have yet to get around to redrawing that little diagram of different ways to understand mental states. But I will take care of that as soon as I can, and I'll upload it to the Discord server. Go on, Yo-Yo. You're in the way again. Go on, buddy. So now what the authors want to do in this chapter is work out what are the justification conditions of emotions on the attitudinal theory. And the thing that's going to get us there is this talk of why questions, right? Why questions are interesting, as we saw last time, because the fact that we can ask why questions about emotions is one thing that differs. Yo, come on. Sorry, my cat's going in front of the screen again. The reason we can, the fact that we can ask these why questions about emotions kind of reveals that they're the sort of state for which we either have or lack reasons. And this is different from perceptions, right? Remember when we talked about perceptual experience sort of giving you everything you need to justify perceptual judgments. Emotions aren't like this, right? Like if I'm looking at the blue vase or the red circle, my visual experience, which is perceptual, justifies my judgment, right? Everything that I need there to make a judgment that I am looking at a red vase or a blue vase or a red circle or whatever, it's all there in my experience. So these why questions kind of hit bottom when we ask them about perceptions. Like, why do you believe there's a tree over there? Well, I seem to see it, right? You just see the tree. The why questions kind of reach rock bottom there. But this isn't the case with emotions, right? If we say, why are you angry, for example, you might reply with, well, that remark was offensive. This person said an offensive remark to me. And we can even ask more why questions, like, well, why was it offensive? Why were you offended by this, right? So being in that state of anger is, unlike looking at a blue vase or a tree or whatever, a state for which you can have or lack reasons. And this is going to get us to the justification conditions of the emotions, as we will see in a moment. So that's it for the recap. Correctness conditions are relatively straightforward, but the justification conditions kind of have yet to, show themselves or be shown by the authors, right? And like I was saying before, the fact that emotions we don't easily hit bottom when asking why questions about emotions, right? We give reasons for our emotions, right? Oh, why are you angry? Well, that remark was offensive. Why was it offensive? So on and so forth. So we give reasons for our emotions, and the authors think that these reasons that we give often refer to the evaluative properties, right, that the object of our emotions bears. So one quick thing about judgments again. Before we get into this sort of section about value intuitions versus value judgments, we've already seen that emotions are not judgments in themselves, right? We saw that there were problems with the evaluative judgment theory, perhaps even problems with certain like embodied judgment theories, like Prince's theory. So maybe, maybe emotions are not judgments themselves, but maybe evaluative judgments sort of work as correct accounts of justified emotions, right? Maybe our evaluative judgments are, that we make, say, after the emotion, after the episode, somehow justifies the emotion that we've experienced, right? So that is to say, like, oh, if somebody says something that may be offensive and I become angry, then I might use my my judgment that it's an offensive remark to justify my anger, or perhaps my anger as evidence for, oh, that was an offensive remark, right? So maybe evaluative judgments are correct accounts of justified emotions. That's a possibility the authors raise here, but they're sort of doubtful about this, and there's a few worries, right? One reason to be worried is that we'd have to say that all emotions that aren't preceded by an endorsement of the relevant propositional contents, all of those emotions are unjustified. And that's kind of weird, right? I mean, I in feeling anger at an offensive remark, that's not preceded by an endorsement of any particular belief about that remark. I just get angry. You see what I mean? And further, evaluative judgments are usually made as a result of an emotional episode that we undergo, right? Like, kind of as I just said a moment ago, if I have this emotional reaction of anger to some remark, my reaction is used to justify the evaluative judgment that the remark was offensive, right? I wouldn't feel angry if the remark wasn't offensive. So it'd be weird to try and then flip it around and do the opposite thing. It would be strange to try and justify emotions by appealing to evaluative judgments, because often we're justifying evaluative judgments or making evaluative judgments as a result of the emotional experience, right? And finally, another problem with the idea that evaluative judgments are a correct account of justified emotions is that evaluative judgments don't really answer these why questions, right? The reasons because, to quote the authors, evaluative judgments are not legitimate end stations in the quest for justifying emotions, since they themselves stand in need of justification, right? Why we make these evaluative judgments is, after all, the question we started with. So much for evaluative judgments figuring in the justification conditions of emotions. Does anybody have any questions so far? Does everybody understand what I've said so far? Just because there's a lot going on here. Yeah, Chelsea, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
I don't really understand why it has to be able to go both ways. Like why? So they're talking about how we wouldn't be able to say this thing is offensive because we're angry, but that also means that we can't say that we are angry because we deem something offensive. Is that what's being said?
Yeah, it's just, I think the authors are saying that we can't have it both ways. Like if we want, like the idea being explored is whether evaluative judgments play some role in the justification of emotions, right? But the problem is that evaluative judgments are usually made as a result of having an emotion to explain the emotion, right? Right.
Okay.
So we're trying to answer some of the why questions, perhaps with an evaluative judgment, like why are you angry? Like I'm angry. You say something offensive, then I get angry, and you ask me why are you angry, and I say, oh well, the remark was offensive, and that's a value judgment I've just made after the emotion. So I cannot then use evaluative judgments as a justification condition. That would be having it both ways. It can't work both ways. It's got to work one way or the other. And
Okay.
then further, that judgment also needs justification, right? There are why questions we can ask about that judgment too.
Okay.
Yeah. So, evaluative judgments, not going to be much help, but we can look for justification conditions elsewhere too. And the authors here briefly explore the idea that instead of value judgments, maybe value intuitions can supply us the answer we need. So here, instead of making some kind of deliberative judgment about like the offensiveness of a remark or the danger of a dog, what my fear of the dog is, or my anger at an offensive remark is my reaction to my intuition that the dog is dangerous or that the remark is offensive. Now, this I think is drawing from some thinkers like Goldie. I can't remember who else exactly that are mentioned at this point. It's interesting and maybe even a little bit appealing right off the bat to sort of appeal to intuition, but there's a number of problems that pop up here. And they are basically the following. Yeah, and yeah, right. I'll get to that comment in a sec that Chelsea offers in the chat, but that is a good point. I'll come back to that in a moment. There's a number of problems. The first being that this suggests, what the authors call a sort of quasi-perceptual contact with evaluative properties. But they point out that there's no good evidence suggesting how this would work, or even that it is how it works, right? This is one of the problems with embodied theories. I think this is one of the criticisms they level against Prince, in fact, is that, okay, how does the body and these changes in body states actually put us in touch with the relevant evaluative properties? It's kind of mysterious. So does it really make things more clear? Maybe not, the authors say. Another problem is that if we treat these value intuitions as a kind of sui generis mental state, a mental state, its own class of mental states, well, then it just looks like we're kind of making stuff up to solve our problems, right? That's called ad hoc, Latin ad hoc, out of whole cloth. Like, oh, maybe there are, yeah, right, Elo, yeah, I agree. It's problematic. It's almost humorously problematic. Like, oh, value judgments don't work. What about value intuitions? Oh, what are those? Oh, that's a mental state I just made up that will help solve the problems that we're facing right now, the justification conditions, right? So that's a problem. And a further problem is that this claim that value intuitions can even address why questions is certainly not, well, no, it's not open for debate. It is open for debate. And we'll go through some examples in a moment. But just to return back to Chelsea's comment here in the chat, isn't intuition just quick judgment? Yeah, on some accounts that I'm familiar with, which seem to me to be relevant here because, geez, I don't remember the authors' names, but it's a chapter in the textbook I use when I teach moral psychology, the chapter on moral intuitions. And moral intuitions, talk of moral intuitions is quite closely tied to moral emotions, right? So, oh, sorry.
No, I just said okay. I'm just gonna, since you're talking, I'm just gonna say okay.
Okay. So they present this view of intuitions as rapid unconscious judgments.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, intuitions, after reading through the last chapter, intuitions may be similar to emotions. If the authors are right that emotions are felt bodily attitudes, intuitions may be like that too. They may not be judgments. It depends on where what content we're talking about and where it's fixed, as we discussed last time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, I would have to take a look at some more detailed sort of philosophy of mind accounts of what intuitions actually are, and I have not done that. But it seems to me that, I mean, I guess if I can use this language, my intuition is that the authors are correct, and there seems to be some kind of mysterious quasi-perceptual thing going on here. If you say, oh, it's an intuition, okay, but we need to know how that would justify my emotion. How would appeal to that justify my anger at the offensive remark or my fear of the dog? And it's not clear, because it's not clear what intuitions are or what's going on with them or anything like that, right?
It seems like there's a almost like a lack of clarity with the definitions that people, like with the terminology that these different theories are proposing. There seems to be some blurred lines.
Yeah.
Where if we were just able to sit these people down and say, okay, what do you mean by intuition? What do you mean by attitude? What do you mean by, to talk to each other? And then we could, there we go.
Exactly, right? What did Wittgenstein say? Philosophy is just people misunderstanding language.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of. We can see that here, right? And
Yeah.
this really, now that we're getting to this bit, now I'm kind of more appreciative of the dialectical ordinary language sort of approach that the authors are using.
Mhm.
But that this claim that value intuitions can address earlier mentioned why questions. I mean, can it? I mean, if I have this fear of the snarling dog that's behaving erratically, you can ask a why question. Why are you afraid? Well, look at that dog over there. I think it's dangerous. Okay, why do you think that? Do I really appeal to an intuition there? I mean,
Mm.
it doesn't seem like I do. It seems like I've got beliefs, I've got perceptions, um, perhaps some motivational states are kicking in there somewhere. But it seems awfully weird to answer a why question with an intuition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I I would almost say that an intuition is too higher order for what we're talking about. It seems like it's a combination of too many of the things we've already been looking at.
Yeah. And it's not even clear what they are. So
Yeah.
if they are maybe a higher order sort of thing, they're not like a perception, right?
Mm.
Um, so yeah, the authors don't really spend too much time on this, but I think it's a really interesting question.
Mm.
But I guess the answers would turn on what intuitions turn out to be. And I have to admit that I don't know exactly what the current literature says about this, although it would be interesting to find out. So I don't know, maybe next time I teach the class, or if someone's writing an essay and intuitions come up, um, maybe one of you will find something interesting. Um, Now where are we going? Okay, so value judgments don't work, value intuitions don't work. So we need, okay, so how do we justify our emotions, right? We can't do it with evaluative judgments or value intuitions. So let's go back to the why questions that we were discussing a moment ago. Deonna and Teroni come back to this after their small section on value judgments and value intuitions. And they do something really interesting. They point out that there are actually two different kinds of answers, or two ways of answering why questions. These two different kinds of answers depend on what we are appealing to answer the question. So the first way to answer a why question is described on page 95, where the authors say that why questions are typically answered by reference to the various cognitive bases that emotions may have. So, experiencing an emotion, for this to work, experiencing an emotion must presuppose a cognitive state about the object of the emotion, right? It presupposes there are cognitive bases there, beliefs about things, for example, or maybe perceptions of things, right? And answers to why questions that appeal to the cognitive bases, what they actually do is appeal to the contents, or maybe some other salient feature of the cognitive basis or bases of the emotional experience. So the authors explain it actually quite clearly for a change right here. Example on page 95, again, quote, why are you afraid of the lion? Well, I see it staring at me and approaching fast. The answer proceeds here by explaining the subject's way of apprehending those aspects of the situation in light of which her emotional attitude is assessed as correct or incorrect, right? So here the cognitive base is a perception, right? I see it staring at me and approaching fast. So there's a cognitive base there, the content of which is sort of like the basis for your fear of the lion, right? So why are you afraid of the lion? Well, in this kind of answer, which they call a cognitive base answer, we're appealing to the contents or some other salient feature of the cognitive basis of the emotion. Now, it is important to note, though, that some cognitive bases can themselves be justified or unjustified. Think of beliefs, right? You can have beliefs that are maybe true, but poorly justified. And we saw this when we talked about Gettier cases a little while ago, right? Like, imagine there's a stopped clock in the office. It's stopped at, I don't know, 4:30, right? And I go into the office and I want to check the time. And I look at the clock. Oh, it's 4:30. And I form the belief that it is 4:30. Now, it actually is 4:30 because a broken clock is right twice a day. So I just happened to walk into the office at 4:30 and happened to look at a clock, which just happened to be stopped at 4:30. And I formed the belief that it is 4:30 p.m. I'm correct. My belief is correct. It actually is 4:30, but it's not really a good justification for my belief, right? And there are beliefs that figure into the cognitive bases of emotions that might be justified or unjustified in this way. So I'll kick it over to the class to see if any of you have any examples to highlight this.
So like something like you just said?
Yeah, basically an example of emotion whose cognitive bases feature a belief that is or is not justified.
Okay, one sec.
Okay.
Let me think.
There is an example in the book that I can kind of cover if we can't come up with anything, but it's really just all to highlight that that while there's justification and correctness conditions for emotions, there are also justification and correctness conditions for some of the bases of our emotions. That's the key takeaway, right? Something in the chat. Okay, yeah. So the example in the book is I forget the name, like Mary's emotional response to the prospect of losing her fortune, right? So maybe she's afraid of losing her fortune, and that could be based on a belief like, oh, I own some shares. I think in the book it's like she owns some shares in BMW, and she has a belief that if BMW gets acquired by a company in China or something, the value of the shares may decrease, right? So she has this belief, which could be justified or unjustified, but that belief is also part of the justification conditions or not part of the justification conditions, but part of the part of the cognitive bases, right? So and you can make this simpler too, right? I don't know why. Oh, here we go. There's something in the chat. Oh, Isabella says certainty, confusion, amazement, deja vu. So like cognition could contribute to the phenomenological experience, the feeling of the emotion. I mean, I think, well, phenomenology distinguishes the emotion type, and I don't know, it strikes me that similar cognitive bases, or even the exact same cognitive bases, could be involved in very different emotional reactions, right? So let's make a simpler example. I mean, the snarling dog, right? If I fear the snarling dog because I perceive that it's behaving erratically, and then I form the belief that it's got rabies, for example, and therefore it is dangerous, that belief, it could be correct or incorrect, it could be justified or unjustified. Whether it's correct or not, maybe it's justified by seeing this dog with erratic behavior, frothing at the mouth, something like that, right? The same perception could serve as one of the bases for, I don't know, a humorous reaction toward the dog. If like earlier in the textbook, we're dealing with like a dog trainer who's training the dog for a movie, and the dog is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and he's just happy and excited about it, and you know, like, what a good boy, or something like that, right? So similar bases involved in different experiences, right? I mean, I don't know. We probably shouldn't spend too much time on this point. It's really just to say that some of the cognitive bases might themselves need to be justified, or could be justified or unjustified. Oh. So the simple answers, or the more complex answers to why questions that kind of proceed along the lines that these do, the authors call cognitive base answers. So answers to why questions that appeal to the cognitive bases are cognitive base answers. That's simple. But there's another kind of answer to why questions. On 95, again, the authors write, why questions can receive another kind of answer because the occurrence of emotions is often, if not always, susceptible to rich explanations in terms of the subject's motivational set, right? And what does our motivational set include? It includes a lot of the mental states that we mentioned earlier on in the class, things like moods or temperaments, possibly character traits or sentiments. So these could form a sort of, they're not like a cognitive base, but they're part of a motivational set. How could we answer why questions by appealing to motivational states, or you know, tools from our motivational tool set? Does anyone want to take a crack at this one?
I can definitely speak to personality is my concentration. So I'm in my honors seminar right now, and we often talk about how we have our dispositions and then our states of personality. And so if somebody has a disposition to be, say, if you just can explain away maybe somebody who we know is neurotic, and then they are grumpy about something that, you know, is no big deal to somebody who's more agreeable.
Right.
That's one way, I guess, that we could.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly the sort of thing the authors are after. I think the example they use in the book is like, why did so-and-so experience shame? Well, it's because she's prudish, right? So, which is kind of like, I mean, that's a weird example, but
it's a little outdated, but
yeah,
sure.
like why, like, well, oh, why are these ladies blushing at everything? Like,
Yeah.
so like, it's kind of stupid, but you get the idea. Or
Yeah.
like, you know, like a neurotic person, like you said, who's really grumpy or really anxious.
Mhm.
I always think of I'm always doing the Star Trek examples, but I always think of
Good.
Barclay.
Yeah.
Anyone know Barclay from The Next Generation?
I can't think of who that is. I've seen only half of TNG though.
He's a minor character, but when he gets an episode, it's good. But he's you know, he's like a guy with like social anxiety disorder. And he experiences anxiety over things that would not cause anyone else anxiety because of his personality and because of his mood, right? Because he's just an anxious person. And so when we're appealing to motivational states to answer why questions, the authors will call those motivational base answers. So we have cognitive base answers to why questions and motivational base answers to why questions. So we have two different kinds of answers here. So now we can move on to justified emotions. And holy moly, we're going quick today. Geez, I probably could have included the last section. But if we finish early, is that really that bad? I don't. It's probably fine. Or I can answer questions about your essays or something. Anyway, justified emotions. All right, now we're finally getting to the good stuff. So what the authors do now is continue. Well, no, they don't do this now. They'll examine motivational base answers later, I think in the next chapter. But we can note that we've already seen from our discussion on value judgments and value intuitions that cognitive based answers to these why questions don't refer to either of these things. We've already seen that. Even if you wanted to say like, oh, but maybe it's possible there could be an evaluative judgment or a value intuition in there somewhere. Okay, maybe. But the authors say, like, even if that were true, the cognitive bases of emotions need not and typically do not contain evaluative judgments or value intuitions. Maybe the odd rare exception occurs, but it need not be this way. And indeed, it typically is not like this. So now what we need to do is work out what the relationship is between the contents of the relevant cognitive bases and the evaluative property that features in the emotion's correctness conditions. Because remember, my emotion is correct if and only if the object of my emotion bears the relevant evaluative property. So that's correctness. But to get justification, we need to know how the content of my cognitive bases, which is where where the magic happens, is related to the relevant evaluative property. The authors put it this way, and I know this is a long quote, but I'll read it out and kind of explain as I go. So, excuse me. Oh boy, tired. So quote, this is, for instance, the case when fear is explained by the subject's awareness of a dog with big teeth behaving erratically. If we think for that reason, emotions can be justified independently of antecedent evaluative judgments or value intuitions, there must, of course, be an intimate relation between the content of the cognitive base and the emotion that this cognitive base explains, a relation that makes room for the claim that awareness of the former justifies the latter. All right, that's a lot. What are they saying there? Well, they're saying if we think that we can talk about emotions as justified or unjustified independently of antecedent evaluative judgments. Remember, we make evaluative judgments following from emotions. We don't make them during or before, right? We're doing this independently of judgments or intuitions. And if we're doing that, then there must be some relation between the content of the cognitive base and the emotion that the cognitive base explains. So this is where we get justification, because there's a relation here, hopefully, that makes room for the claim that awareness of the former content of the cognitive base and the latter, the emotion that the cognitive base explains. And since emotional attitudes have correctness conditions that must be couched in evaluative terms, this means that awareness of the cognitive base's content must be able to justify a mental state that is correct if and only if a given evaluative property is exemplified. So, what relation must hold between the content of the cognitive base and the evaluative property featuring in the emotion's correctness conditions, such that awareness of the content of the cognitive base justifies the emotion? Here's the key at the end. And I realize this is long and confusing and quite a mouthful, but this is what we're after. What is the nature of this relation between the content of the cognitive base or bases of our emotion and the evaluative property that features in the emotion's correctness conditions? Because it's that awareness that's going to justify the emotion. Does everybody follow me there? I'm sorry, I know that was a lot. Kind of. Okay. So I'll see if I can put it, I'll see if I can put my own spin on it. So my emotion of fear, let's go with the dog example because the dog example is nice and simple. So my emotion of fear toward the dog is correct if and only if the dog, the object of my emotion, bears the relevant property, namely danger. So that's my correctness conditions there. And as we saw earlier, the reason why emotions are not judgments is because they are not about evaluative properties, right? Like, let's use why questions. There's a dog over there. It's snarling, behaving erratically, running at me. I go, ah! My friend says, Josh, why are you afraid? I don't say because of danger. No, I don't say that. I'm afraid of the dog. I'm not afraid of danger. I'm afraid of the dog. That's why emotions aren't judgments, if you recall. Emotions are not about the evaluative properties themselves. Emotions are about the bearers of evaluative properties. The evaluative properties enter into things when it comes to the cognitive bases of emotions, right? So like I said earlier, the key difference between judgments and emotions as attitudes is what the content is and where it's fixed. And in the case of emotions, evaluative properties are not the contents of emotions. They might feature in the contents of cognitive bases of emotions, but not in the emotions themselves. The emotions are about particular objects, not the properties they bear, right? Right. Yeah. Yeah. This is what this is kind of what most of the last lecture was about, because I had that realization after reading that review that I posted to my Discord server. And I realized as I was reading through that summary, I was like, oh, that's where, but that got lost. Yeah, no way. No, don't worry about it, Chelsea. That's what that detail for me, I think, got lost just because that was like such a long and dense chapter. But then when I read a short review of the book, I was like, oh yeah, okay. And that can also help us make the justification conditions clear, right? So, okay, having said all that, we know about correctness conditions. We know where the content is fixed and how that makes emotions maybe better understood as attitudes rather than judgments. Now we've got justification conditions. What we're looking for here is some kind of thing, some kind of relationship, right, between the content of the cognitive base and the evaluative property featured in the correctness conditions, right? Because the evaluative property in an emotion is not the content of the emotion. It might be the content of one of the cognitive bases of your emotion, though. But it also features in the correctness conditions, right? So what's the relation between the evaluative property or the relevant evaluative properties featuring in my cognitive bases that also features in the correctness conditions? We need to work that relationship out so that we can see exactly where the evaluative properties are. We know that they're not the content of the emotion. The content of the emotion, what the emotion is about, is the dog, not danger. So danger must feature somewhere in the correctness conditions of emotions. You know, my fear is not correct if the dog is not dangerous. But it's also got to be somewhere in my cognitive bases, because it's not in the emotion itself. It's the content of one of my bases for the emotion, right? Okay. So let's just make sure everybody, hell, that wasn't any clearer than the textbook. But I don't know. Does everybody understand?
Can I propose like an example that this made me think of, and you can maybe tell me if I've got it right or wrong?
Yes, please
So
do.
I'm reading Prince's gut reactions right now.
Oh,
And
awesome.
yeah, he uses an example early on in one of the chapters. I can't remember which one, where he's talking about how smoke can signify fire, but you're like it doesn't always. And however, if you're gonna have fire, you're gonna have smoke. In a case like this, oh, I lost my train of thought. Something to do with the fact that there is the actual. Oh, I can't remember what it was. I had it there. It was on the tip of my tongue. Had something to do with the fact that we have the thing that we understand as related to something, as opposed to the actual thing itself.
Yeah.
Okay, it's fine.
The authors, I think in the previous chapter they were talking about this same example that Prince talks about with smoke and fire.
Mhm.
The question is, does smoke actually represent the presence of fire, right?
Right. Mhm.
And then maybe you can make an argument that it does, but can we do the same thing for body states and evaluative properties, right? I think Prince thinks we can, but
Mm.
these authors say no, we can't. But we can do something else. We can look at evaluative properties as supervening on non-evaluative properties. And that's where we are now. I can explain that
Okay, cool.
Oh my goodness, coffee. So let's this is from earlier in the book too, not this quote, but this is from discussion in chapter 4 when they were talking about evaluative properties. They say, commenting on the shortcomings of various attempts at analyzing the nature of evaluative properties in terms of emotional responses, we said that evaluative properties supervene on natural properties. The relation we are now after is, we suggest, one of strong supervenience between evaluative and non-evaluative properties. And they continue on to the next page. The important idea for our present purposes is simply that an object exemplifies a given evaluative property at a given time and in a given context in virtue of exemplifying some non-evaluative properties. So let's try and recall what supervenience is, right? Does anybody know? Yeah, kind of. It's like I think of it as like it's on top of or emerges out of something, right? So maybe the admirable painting, right? I look at this painting, I think it's beautiful and admirable. So I say, oh, it has the evaluative property of being admirable. And that maybe supervenes on other properties like, the symmetry of the face of the person that's in the picture, right? Or the colors that are used or something, right? So the idea is that beauty or admirableness or whatever supervenes on natural properties. That's the idea. So that's kind of what the authors are appealing to here, is this idea of supervenience, entailment. Oh, is that the thing about smoke and fire?
No, sorry, like to supervene, like does it just entail then that the other things that you're talking about are also?
Well, the way that the authors describe it is in terms of constitutiveness, right?
Okay.
So if I ask, like, what are evaluative properties, like danger and beauty, what are these? Well, they are just natural properties that come together in the right ways at the right time in a particular context.
Okay.
Right. So the evaluative property of danger in the case of the dog supervenes on natural properties like the dog having sharp teeth and aggressively running toward me. So these are natural properties which in that context make the dog dangerous. So we say that danger supervenes on these natural properties, and therefore all those natural properties coming together at a given time in a given context constitute the evaluative property.
Okay.
Right.
And
So
that's where I guess I thought the entail, like, that would be that. But if they use constitute, that's different then, yeah.
Yeah, constitute, I think, is just philosophically a little bit more precise.
Okay. I
So
never
that
want to meet this dog that we keep talking about.
I just imagine it's Tula, because she doesn't really get along with other dogs.
There you go.
So you'd think she's aggressive, but really she's just kind of socially awkward. So and it's also funny because
That's good.
yeah. But there is a new dog in the building. I've heard it barking and I haven't met it, but it's got a really fierce bark, and I'm kind of like, where's this mystery dog and what does it want? I don't know. So
Wants to be involved in the philosophy.
apparently, but I don't know, man. I haven't met it. I like dogs, but when I haven't met them, I'm kind of like, I don't know you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Justified emotions. Okay, we're nearly there. That's awesome. Let's continue on. Okay, so what's the idea? The idea is that non-evaluative properties feature in the contents of the cognitive bases of our emotions. And remember, evaluative properties supervene on non-evaluative properties. So evaluative properties aren't even directly part of the contents of the cognitive bases of emotions, right? Not really, because they just supervene on the non-evaluative properties that are features of the contents of our cognitive bases, right? Like the dog, my perception that the dog has sharp teeth and is running toward me. That's the content of my cognitive base, but the evaluative properties supervene on that. See? So the authors say, an emotion is justified if and only if, in the situation in which the subject finds herself, the properties she is or seems to be aware of and on which her emotions is based constitute or would constitute an exemplification of the evaluative property that features in the correctness conditions of the emotion she undergoes. Whew. Everybody follow me. I mean, this is so abstract. Somewhat. Okay, fair enough. We can kind of hash this out, because we have time. We have time. I know it's Thursday and it's late, but yeah, it's the tricky part to wrap your head around is how abstract all of this is. The relevant evaluative properties don't seem to actually be anywhere, right? They're not in the content of our cognitive bases, right? They're just kind of, I don't know, distributed, right? Like, so,
but it almost feels like this is like it's giving us more because it's allowing for them to be more distributed.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's and it's an interesting way to talk about properties, right? And it's also kind of fun to think about, like, okay, so what does this mean? Does this mean that these are real properties? Oh, Tula, watch out. Does this mean that these are real properties that are mind independent or not? Right. And that's the fun question, because now we're getting into some metaphysics, right? Yeah. So that's cool. But yeah, just to kind of make sense of this quote, to use the dog example. Actually, come here, Toots. Snarling dog, come here. Oh no, you're behind me. Okay, I'll stay over there then, I guess. Come here. Come here. Come here. Not cooperating. Okay.
No.
Well, so I have my fear of the snarling dog, which is correct if the dog bears the property of being dangerous.
Right.
But is my emotion justified? Well, it's justified if I'm aware. Let me just get rid of this so I can. If I'm aware of the properties, like the dog has sharp teeth, that it's snarling, which are the non-evaluative properties that the evaluative property of danger, which features in the correctness conditions of my emotion. I've gone and mixed myself up again. So my fear is correct if the dog is dangerous.
Right.
My fear is justified if what's that word? I keep forgetting it. If the relevant non-evaluative properties, which danger supervenes on, if they are part of the content of my cognitive bases, and the thing that supervenes on them, that evaluative property is what features in the correctness conditions of emotions, then my emotion's justified. Okay. Right. That's what they're saying. Okay. I'm sorry, I don't think I can make it any clearer than that. No, it's good. Okay. So, the epistemological claim, just to continue quoting, the epistemological claim distinctive of this account is thus that if a relation of constitution obtains, awareness of the properties that constitute the evaluative property justifies an emotion whose correctness conditions make reference to that property. Consequently, justified emotions need not be based on evaluative judgments or value intuitions. Okay, that is actually pretty clear. That's what I was just trying to say. If this relation of constitution obtains between non-evaluative and evaluative properties, and the evaluative property features in the correctness conditions of my emotion, and the non-evaluative properties featuring in the content of my cognitive bases are there in my cognitive bases, then my emotion is justified, and there's no need to appeal to evaluative judgments or value intuitions. Awesome. Now, the authors think that this is pretty straightforward, but it could raise some pretty interesting epistemological issues in cases where the cognitive bases of our emotions are beliefs which also depend on like chains of reasoning and which themselves have justification and correctness conditions. So that's cool, but that's kind of beyond the scope of what the authors are doing in the textbook, and I think probably beyond the scope of what we are doing here. So that's it. Now we have justification conditions for emotions. So that's great. What I want to do next time is just cover the final section of this chapter, bridging the gaps and conclusion. It's kind of, I mean, it's not that long of a section. Whoops. But I kind of didn't want to go too late tonight because I want to get up early and do some grading and get everybody feedback on their proposals and stuff. So we'll save this for next time, and then we'll start the nature and role of affective explanations. And just remember, everybody, per my earlier announcement, I've given one last little extension on response number 3, just to give everybody some breathing room. I'm still focusing on getting your essay proposals graded before finishing up the second response. But this way, hopefully, you'll also have your second response before you have to hand in your third one, right? So that's why I'm doing this. So we'll all try and use this time wisely and get that all taken care of. And then that should leave us, hopefully, just enough time to finish the textbook. So that's what I'm hoping. So I think that's it. Yeah, thanks, everybody. I can hang around if there are any questions. If not, have a good weekend, everybody. And let me know if you have any questions about anything, or if you need to talk shop about the essay or anything like that. So otherwise, take care. All right. Looks like everybody's gone. Stop share. Class is done. And end transmission.